Hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today for Poetry Thursday, I'll be, starting a bit of a new project. Sometimes the problem with a Poetry Thursday video is I can't decide what to read, or I might be working through a long book of poems in my own reading, and I'm not sure if I want to share that or if I want to read something different, whether I want to pick something up randomly off the shelf. So I thought it might help to try and do a bit of a project and work through an anthology, since quite well, certainly Steve Donahue, he's been doing that. It seems to have worked pretty well for him so far. I think I have seen some other people work their way, at least partially, through some anthologies in the past for Poetry Thursday. So I thought I'd give that a go, and thought I'd go through one of my favourite little anthologies. It's the Penguin Book of Modern American Verse, edited by Geoffrey Moore. I think it's from the early, is it from the early 50s? Let's see if I can find some information. Yeah, it was first published in 1954, and this book, when I found it in a charity shop, um, I hadn't read sort of more than half the poets in here, and so it was just a great introduction to a whole new world of poetry. But it starts in some familiar places, and ironically, it starts with the poet that I'm reading at the moment, and that's Emily Dickinson. So I thought I'd go through a bit of the short biography that he includes in here. Well, actually, it's quite long for Emily Dickinson, and then I'll read you a couple of her poems. So I'll just read a selection from the introduction here. Emily Dickinson was born in Amherst, Massachusetts in 1830. Her grandfather founded Amherst College, of which her father, a well-known lawyer, was treasurer. Her reputation as the nun of Amherst has obscured the fact that until her middle 20s, she was renowned for her wit in a lively and sociable household. She cultivated intellectual friendships with men, an advanced thing for a woman in mid-19th century New England. And then it goes into some of the men that she had these intellectual friendships with, and goes on to say that she died in 1886. And estimates of the number of the poems published anonymously during Miss Dickinson's lifetime vary between 2 and 5. But if she did not seek fame while she was alive, she thought and wrote a good deal about it, as Millicent Todd Bingham showed in Bolts of Melody. This last instalment of Emily Dickinson's poems still leaves a number of unpublished, and brings to light a curious feud which has been responsible for a good deal of uncertainty about exactly what and how much Emily Dickinson did write. I think since this anthology was put together, um, the sort of entirety of all of the manuscripts, all the originals, I think were donated to a certain university. Can't remember exactly where. And so then revised editions of the complete Emily Dickinson were then subsequently um, put out, and you could see um, all the poems that weren't included before, and you could see how much that the publishers had changed them, particularly I'm trying to find his name, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who um, was one of Dickinson's correspondents, and he was a publisher, a man of letters. And I think, being an editor, he wanted to sort of quote unquote tidy up these poems. And so the versions of the poems that we have here in this anthology are the earlier um, versions, at least in terms of what a readership would have seen before we got the more accurate revised editions later on. Towards the end, he goes in to talk about just the style of her poetry, and I quite enjoyed this. The liveliness and modernness of Emily Dickinson's imagery is perpetually astonishing. Like most good poets, she perceives through the metaphor more frequently than the simile, and her metaphors first make one pause for their strangeness, and then agree to their justness. Contemporary as she was with Christina Georgia Rossetti, she could not avoid a certain element of whimsicality, but this is very small. I like to see it lap the miles. On the face of it, an ecstatic young lady's cry yields, at a closer look, an odd and typical ambiguity. Her comments on life are certainly not whimsical. Her metaphors, gazing grain, zero at the bone, are as penetrating as her irony. For example, I could not stop for death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me, which reaches the point of paradox in such phrases as parting is all we know of heaven and all we need of hell. She is often didactic but never moralizes, which is remarkable if one considers the poetic climate of her age. The almost nursery rhyme regularity of much of her verse is set against her assonance, the grimness of her images, and her dramatic shifts of tone. R.P. Blackmer said makes the point that she was neither a professional poet nor an amateur. She had, he said, the power and perception of a great poet, but not the professional equipment for it, so that, unwilling ever to subvert her vision to her comparatively poor craft, she, quote, let herself go. If this is true, the result is particularly successful in its combination of prosodic idiosyncrasy and moral insight. Miss Dickinson is a personal poet, and then a quote, "My wars are laid away in books," she says in one of her letters. Through the power of imagination, she objectifies her experience into truth. The face in the portrait has the eyes and expression of a visionary. So I don't think that Geoffrey Moore quite agrees with R.P. Blackmer there. But I thought I'd read a couple of poems, and the first is quite a short one, and the last two lines were quoted just there in the introduction. And this is, "My life closed twice before me." Oh no, sorry, "My life closed twice before its close." My life closed twice before its close. It yet remains to see if immortality unveil a third event to me, so huge, so hopeless to conceive as these that twice befell. Parting is all we know of heaven and all we need of hell. And then there's a slightly longer one here that I can remember standing out to me when I found it in the complete Emily Dickinson that I'm reading through at the moment. And it's one of these poems that you can tell she's just written from looking out her window and sort of looking at all the wildlife and everything going on in her garden. And yet she, I don't know, there's so much imagination, there's so much going on in there for what seems so sort of commonplace in a way, which is, I think, part of what a lot of people enjoy about her poetry, that the I don't know the sort of quotidian everyday world just sort of explodes in her mind, and it's wonderful. So this is "A bird came down the walk." A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad, They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home than oars divide the ocean, too silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. It's just really odd. Like, I love the fact that the butterflies are flying. Sorry, that they're swimming in banks of noon, but plashless, which is a really odd word. Probably isn't a word. Yeah, I love that. Um, I kind of messed that one up, um, since the first two stanzas in there are very end stopped, and each stanza is very much its own unit. But then the last three just sort of flow into each other, and so at the end of the third stanza, I sort of left a bit more of a pause than I needed to, I think. But regardless, it's just a great little poem, and so odd. Yeah, such an odd little simile, such an odd little image to end with, and yet, yeah, I just love it. So that's Emily Dickinson. Next week we've got Edwin Arlington Robinson, who I don't know a lot about. I must have read a little bit of him the first time I went through this, but since I can't really remember him, maybe that's not really boding very well. But yes, hopefully it won't be too long before the next Poetry Thursday and the next dose of modern American verse from the mid-50s. So for now, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.